Tennis sponsorships have become a huge part of how athletes and the sport makes its money, with brands like Uniqlo giving out $500 million deals to players and Nike signing the likes of Alcaraz, Sinner and Federer at one point. So let's take the most significant example out of them all. Roger Federer had a 24-year-long contract with Nike where he earned $10 million per year. The partnership included both apparel and footwear, which turned Federer into one of Nike's most visible tennis stars. Then after nearly 3 decades of loyalty to one brand, Federer quit. He moved to Uniqlo and signed a new 10-year, $300 million plus deal with Uniqlo. Another significant question comes about from this as well, because why after 24 long years did Federer move to Uniqlo, as he was already a multi-millionaire, so it couldn't have just been for the money? The answer for this, however, is surprisingly simple. So in this last video of the 3-part series, we look at why these companies spend so much money on tennis when sports like football have 10 times the audience. "24 years. That's how long Roger Federer wore Nike. From the braided hair teenager winning Wimbledon in 2003, to the tailored icon lifting his 20th Grand Slam in Melbourne, Nike was stitched into every major tournament. Around $10 million a year, apparel, footwear, global campaigns, the RF logo, and it wasn't just a contract, it was more of a brand identity that was built into time. And that RF logo matters more than most people realize, because under Nike, Federer wasn't just another athlete on the roster, he became the tennis face of the company. Calm, precise, and global. When he walked into the center court in a white cardigan in 2008, that wasn't just style, but it was more positioning than anything else, because Nike sold elegance through him. But here's where it gets interesting. By 2018, Federer was already worth hundreds of millions. He didn't need another contract to secure his lifestyle. He had 20 slams, global recognition, and endorsements across every category. So when Nike chose not to match Uniqlo's offer, reportedly around $300 million for 10 years, it wasn't simply about the extra money. It was more about leverage. Under Nike, the RF logo had become iconic, but Nike owned it, and that created tension in negotiations, because Federer wanted control more than anything else. He wanted long-term security that extended way beyond his playing days, and he wanted a deal that paid him even after retirement. And Uniqlo offered exactly that. And here's the shift. With Nike, Federer was one of many superstars, but with Uniqlo, he became the centerpiece. They didn't just sign him to sell shirts, but they built global identity around him. A clean design, a minimalistic design, and class. Federer wasn't competing with basketball players or footballers for attention, but he was the attention, and he created that attention. So when people ask why he left after nearly 3 decades of loyalty, the answer is simple. He moved from being an asset to a foundation. On paper, football completely overwhelms tennis in raw numbers, with World Cup finals crossing the billion viewer mark and normal league matches pulling in weekly audiences that tennis simply cannot match across a full season. But raw scale doesn't automatically equal higher commercial value, and that's the part most people miss when they compare two sports side by side, because tennis audiences are structurally different. The average tennis fan tends to sit in a higher income bracket, travels more frequently, and engages with premium products much more comfortably. However, this isn't always the case, it can differ side to side. And they follow the sport across continents rather than within one domestic league system. Which means brands are not just buying reach, but they're buying purchasing power combined with global mobility. And then there's the calendar. Football has intense peaks, but it's regionally anchored. Tennis, however, moves continuously from Melbourne to Paris to London to New York and then across Masters events in Europe. This creates almost a year-round international visibility that keeps a player, and therefore a brand, in front of a worldwide audience rather than just a single market. So brands need to ask themselves this: would you rather be limited to a certain audience, or would you want to be known worldwide? But the biggest difference sits at the center of the court. In football, brands attach themselves to teams, and while a star player does matter, the shirt badge usually overweighs the individual. So when a club wins, the moment is shared across an entire squad, coaching staff, and club. But in tennis, the spotlight narrows much further. When Alcaraz lifts a Wimbledon trophy, it's his logo, his outfit, and his sponsor that benefit, because his image alone in every replay and every press conference gives a level of marketing no other sport can achieve. So let's look at it like this. In football, the badge is bigger than the player, but in tennis, the player is the badge. And once you understand that concentration of identity, it becomes clear why certain types of companies, especially those built on prestige and their image, are drawn so strongly toward this sport. If you stand on centre court at Wimbledon, or even just watch it carefully on TV, you start to see why luxury brands feel comfortable here. Because everything is about the setting, from all the white dress code to the quiet applause and the deep green branding. It signals control, heritage, and luxury. Rolex doesn't sponsor chaotic environments, but it aligns itself more with precision, timekeeping, and moments that feel historic rather than loud, which is exactly what Wimbledon offers year after year. And that's why luxury brands operate on their perception rather than volume. So they don't really need the largest audience in the world, they would rather have the audience that values craftsmanship, exclusivity, and long-term excellence. And tennis consistently delivers that demographic through its ticket pricing, hospitality culture, and corporate presence. You rarely see a Rolex banner next to Sunday League football, but you repeatedly see it positioned courtside at Grand Slams. And this quietly reinforces the idea that tennis belongs in a premium environment. Even brands outside traditional luxury like Uniqlo benefit from this atmosphere because tennis allows them to present a clean and simple design. And this identity is what so many brands benefit from. And so when the cameras linger around changeovers, or zoom in on trophy lifts, or capture slow walk-ons onto court in a way that feels almost cinematic, the brand association settles in without ever feeling forced. And once brands recognize that tennis offers not just competition, but a refined global setting, the next logical step is to use that setting to expand into new markets. Tennis isn't rooted in one league or one cultural center. Instead, it rotates throughout a continent that gives brands repeated exposure across Europe, North America, Asia, and Australia within the same calendar year. This global movement matters far more than people think, because when a company signs Federer, Osaka, or Alcaraz, it's not just securing visibility in one country, but they're positioning themselves in multiple regions where that player carries influence, credibility, and an emotional connection with their fans. Federer embodied European elegance while maintaining a massive appeal in the United States and Asia. Osaka created a rare bridge between Japan and American markets at the same time, and Alcaraz now connects Spain with much broader audiences while still resonating strongly in traditional tennis markets like the UK and France. Each player becomes a strategic entry point. And because the 4 Grand Slams sit 4 major global cities like Melbourne, Paris, London, and New York, brands receive structured peaks of exposure every single year without having to shift campaigns dramatically between territories. Football clubs are powerful, but they're often anchored into one city or one country. Tennis players move freely between continents as they carry their sponsors with them into every press conference, every training session, and every trophy lift. So brands aren't just buying TV viewers, but they're buying a territory, access, and a long-term relevance across the world. And when you combine that global movement with the prestigious environment we just talked about, the final question becomes even sharper. Because why are these companies willing to commit such enormous amounts of money up front when there are so many other options? On the surface, a $300 million contract for a tennis player seems excessive, especially when the sport doesn't dominate global viewership charts in the same way football does. But this is the real reason why they do that, because brands aren't calculating return on investment in simple viewer counts, but they're investing in their own perception and in the slow and steady association between their product and the person who represents their product. When Federer stood calmly on match point at Wimbledon, that composure transferred subtly onto whatever logo he wore, and over 2 decades, those repeated moments built a layer of credibility that no short-term advertising campaign could replicate. Nike helped shape the RF image during his peak years, but Uniqlo recognized that the value extended way beyond his active competition, which is why the deal still carries on past his retirement, because his identity was the real asset that brands would love. So brands aren't overpaying for rallies or points or matches, but they're paying for cultural positioning that lasts decades. And when you bring it back to where we started, to Federer leaving Nike after 24 years, that move makes complete sense. Because in tennis, the money has never been about how many people are watching, but it's always been about who's watching, and what that link between the viewer and the brand is worth.